All right, let's jump straight into this incredibly bizarre true story that somehow perfectly blends chaotic back porch science with classic sci-fi tropes. Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today we are looking at one of the absolute wildest intersections of theoretical physics, brazen theft, and sheer, unfiltered homemade ingenuity. We're talking about the legend of Madman Michael Marcum. And honestly, this is a story that proves sometimes the absolute strangest science fiction happens right in someone's backyard.
I mean, seriously, what actually happens when a factory worker with a CD laser, a handful of stolen power grid transformers, and some screws decides to build a time machine on his porch? The sheer absurdity of this premise is just incredible, especially when you realize it literally blacked out an entire Missouri town. When we think of time machines, we usually picture sleek DeLorean steel, right? Or maybe some multi-billion-dollar subterranean government lab. We definitely don't picture a 21-year-old guy sitting on his porch tinkering with repurposed junk. But that's exactly what Michael Marcum did, and man, his experiments got wildly out of hand.
So moving to Section 1, the bizarre radio broadcast.
To really understand this, we have to look back at April 1995. Picture this, an overnight, nationally syndicated broadcast hosted by a legend of late-night paranormal radio. This is where the story of Madman Marcum really exploded into the public consciousness. Let's trace how this went down. It all kicked off with an Associated Press wire story about a Missouri man building a time machine on his porch, which, naturally, caught the radio host's attention. So they track him down, and we find out Marcum had actually just been released from a 90-day jail sentence on March 30th. He was unemployed, he had a whole lot of free time on his hands, and well, he was very ready to talk.
Now, quick question for you. Think about Back to the Future for a second. Who makes the first successful trip through time in that movie? It's Einstein, the dog, right? But while Hollywood uses a cute dog to test time travel, Marcum used a slightly less conventional and, frankly, much more metallic test subject for his porch experiments. But of course, before he could send anything through the fabric of time, he had to actually build the machine.
Which brings us to Section 2, building the porch time machine.
So how exactly did this 21-year-old try to manipulate space-time using salvaged electronics? Well, Marcum's initial goal wasn't even time travel at all. He just wanted to build a massive Frankenstein-style Jacob's ladder. You know what I'm talking about, right? You've seen them in old classic monster movies. Two metal rods standing upright, a crackling electrical arc starts at the base, climbs all the way to the top, breaks, and then magically restarts at the bottom. It's basically the ultimate staple of mad science.
But this is where his absurd methodology is just brilliant. You see, the spark on a Jacob's ladder can be super touchy. If the rods are even a fraction of a millimeter too far apart, you get no arc. Too close, it just gets stuck at the bottom. But Marcum figured out that if he used a salvaged laser from a CD player to ionize and heat the air between the rods, it would lower the electrical resistance. That would basically force the spark to jump perfectly.
And for power, he hand-wound his very own primary transformer to push a staggering 20,000 volts at about 3,000 watts. He quite literally glued metal plates together and kept winding and winding wire something like 450 turns until he stepped his standard household power up to a lethal 20,000 volts. To put that into perspective for a second, that is absolutely more than enough power to instantly end your life.
Okay, Section 3, the disappearing screw breakthrough.
So, with 20,000 volts pumping across the gap and his makeshift CD laser firing away, Marcum turns the whole rig on just to see what would happen. And that is when he noticed something highly unusual. Instead of a normal wavy heat haze, the laser and the voltage combine to create this weird circular distortion. Normally, intense heat just causes wavy vertical lines like looking down an asphalt highway on a hot summer day. But this was a distinct circular-shaped shimmer hovering directly in the dead center of the electrical arc.
Now contrast the classic Hollywood standard of time travel, like a modern nuclear aircraft carrier jumping back to 1941 in The Final Countdown, with what Marcum did. He's just standing on his porch, and he tosses a common sheet metal screw directly into this shimmering circle, and he watches it completely vanish from plain sight, just gone. Half a second later, it pops right back into existence and completely blows up his laser. He hypothesized that he had either created an incredibly intense magnetic field or he had induced a micro-jump into the future. He actually repeated this 3 times, and the massive energy feedback caused his CD laser to literally catch on fire.
Now, speaking of sci-fi, how many time-traveling robots are seen in the primary Terminator franchise? It's 11.
But unlike the 11 hyper-precise, time-traveling cyborgs of the Terminator movies, Marcum's machine was going to require a serious upgrade to actually prove his screw traveled through time. I mean, half a second of disappearance just wasn't enough data for him to be totally certain. He needed to throw objects much further into the future or the past. And he realized the only way to pull that off was with more power, a lot more power.
And that leads right into Section 4, the Transformer Heist.
So, to build a bigger machine and get that massive juice, Marcum realized he needed commercial-grade equipment, which led to an incredibly brazen theft. Treating the local power station like his own personal salvage yard, he drove a pickup truck in broad daylight, 11 a.m. to be exact, and simply loaded up unused grid equipment. He targeted a generating station over in King City, Missouri. These commercial transformers were just sitting there by the station, supposedly rusting away. And instead of sneaking around in the dead of night like you'd expect, he basically used the psychology that if you look like you're supposed to be there doing a job, nobody's going to question you.
Now, the largest of these stolen transformers weighed a massive 350 pounds. That means he definitely had unwitting accomplices helping him out. You don't just casually toss a 350-pound chunk of industrial grid equipment into the back of a pickup truck by yourself. Marcum actually admitted on the radio broadcast that he had a couple of buddies help him load them up.
The power company valued all this stolen equipment at over $13,000. And get this, he didn't just steal one, he stole 6 of them. But the true madness of his engineering was how he hooked them up. Once he got them to his porch, he wired the primary side of the transformers to his giant 4-foot metal rods, and then he hooked the secondary side straight into the power line coming into his house to radically step up the voltage, backwards.
Well, you can probably guess what happened next. His attempt to fire up this supersized, completely unregulated porch machine completely browned out his town. The Stanberry police chief noted later that the stolen equipment had a capacity of anywhere from 12,000 to 76,000 volts each. Marcum drained so much juice from the local power grid that he triggered massive power interruptions for the town's 1,300 residents. Obviously, this immediately drew the attention of the police. They seized his porch experiment, and Marcum pleaded guilty to the theft. That's what landed him in jail.
Now, in the cult classic time travel movie Primer, the protagonists have to worry about the machine being flooded with dangerous argon gas. That's why they need oxygen tanks. But for the folks listening to Marcum's radio broadcast, they were far more concerned about the incredibly dangerous electricity he was casually playing with. As the radio hosts interview them, and they are literally discussing the exact schematic of how to build a 20,000-volt step-up transformer using residential power lines, the audience started getting incredibly anxious.
Moving on to Section 5, the angry public reaction.
So when the public finally got to call in and weigh in on this backport science experiment, it definitely wasn't all just awe and wonder. Some people quickly realized that broadcasting these step-by-step instructions across the entire nation was highly irresponsible. A caller named Maureen from California was absolutely furious. She accused the host of broadcasting a highly dangerous recipe for electrocution to millions of people. She correctly pointed out that there are folks out there who might actually be ignorant enough to try hooking up their neighborhood power lines to a CD player laser on their own porch. Delivering the ultimate straight man defense, the host had to step in and simply advise the audience not to casually steal commercial transformers to build homemade time machines. He gently pushed back against the angry caller, playfully arguing that he wouldn't actually air instructions on building an atomic bomb. But, he conceded the point, officially putting out a blanket national warning. Listen, everybody, do not try this extremely lethal electrical experiment at home.
But meanwhile, other callers totally ate up the sci-fi angle. They were wondering if Marcum's missing sheet metal screw was currently sitting in some prehistoric rock formation. One listener sent a message outlining how archaeologists occasionally discover perfectly machined modern metal screws embedded in quartz that is millions of years old. Could one of Marcum's porch screws have literally fallen backwards into the medieval era? Or, I don't know, the time of the dinosaurs? It's a fun thought.
Ultimately, when you look at the whole shebang, the story of Madman Marcum leaves us with this hilarious, chaotic blend of genuine engineering ambition and just a total, absolute lack of common sense. It's a perfect reminder of how easily our fascination with the unknown can override our basic instinct for self-preservation. I mean, he wasn't insane. As the local police chief put it, he was a highly intelligent person with a complete lack of common sense. He genuinely created an incredibly complex, highly dangerous electrical setup on a whim just to see what would happen.
But I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought about the absolute positioning of time travel. This proves why porch science might just be the most dangerous kind of sci-fi there is. Another listener pointed out that the Earth, our solar system, the Milky Way, they're constantly moving thousands of miles per hour through the universe, right? So if Marcum's screw traveled half a second through time without moving through space, it wouldn't pop back up on his porch. It would pop back into existence miles away from Earth, just floating in the cold vacuum of space. Makes you think, doesn't it? And that wraps up our dive into this wild, electrifying explainer. Stay curious, keep exploring, but please leave the local power grid transformers exactly where they are.